The origins of the MiG-21 trace back to the early 1950s, a period marked by rapid advances in jet propulsion, aerodynamics, and air combat doctrine. The Korean War had demonstrated the decisive role of jet fighters, particularly the MiG-15 and MiG-17, in challenging Western air power. These aircraft proved formidable in close combat, but they were subsonic designs in an era when supersonic flight was quickly becoming the benchmark for modern fighters. The Soviet Union recognized the need for a new generation of interceptor capable of reaching Mach 2 speeds, climbing rapidly to intercept intruders, and operating with minimal maintenance from dispersed airfields. The design challenge was assigned to the Mikoyan-Gurevich Design Bureau, already well established through the success of its earlier MiG fighters. Soviet Air Force requirements emphasized speed, altitude, and climb rate over endurance or payload capacity. This focus reflected the primary mission: intercepting high-speed Western bombers before they could deliver nuclear weapons. Maneuverability and short-range air-to-air combat were secondary considerations at this stage, though they would later prove critical to the aircraft's enduring legacy. Key engineers, including Artem Mikoyan himself, began work on a new fighter concept using a tailless delta wing configuration. Delta wings offered advantages for supersonic flight, including reduced drag, improved high-speed stability, and increased internal volume for fuel. However, they also had drawbacks at lower speeds, such as higher landing speeds and reduced agility during certain maneuvers. The design team studied foreign developments closely, incorporating lessons from captured German research on high-speed aerodynamics, and closely observing Western designs like the French Mirage series, which would emerge later in the decade. The new aircraft, internally designated E-5 during the experimental phase, would feature a nose-mounted intake with a central shock cone to regulate airflow to the engine at supersonic speeds. This arrangement simplified the fuselage structure and allowed the main wing area to be optimized for high-speed performance. Power would be provided by the Tumansky R-11 turbojet, designed to deliver both high thrust and reliability in harsh operational environments. Guided missile technology was in its infancy, and early concepts for the fighter included both cannon armament and provision for air-to-air missiles. The MiG-21 was envisioned as a point defense interceptor with a relatively small radar set, sufficient for guiding short-range missiles but not for long-range engagements. Range limitations were accepted as a trade-off for performance, with the assumption that ground-controlled interception networks would direct the aircraft to its targets. From its inception, the MiG-21 was intended to be not only a high-performance machine, but also simple to produce and maintain in large numbers. The Soviet military-industrial system valued designs that could be manufactured quickly, deployed to frontline units with minimal training, and operated from a variety of bases, including primitive airstrips, without extensive logistical support. This approach would later prove crucial to the aircraft's success in both Soviet service and export markets. By the mid-1950s, the design work had matured sufficiently for prototype construction. The aircraft that would eventually become the MiG-21 was poised to enter the testing phase, where its performance, handling, and reliability would be evaluated under the demanding standards of the Soviet Air Force. This period would determine whether the ambitious delta-wing interceptor could meet the promise of speed, climb, and operational simplicity that its designers envisioned. The prototype and testing phase of the MiG-21 program began in the mid-1950s with the construction of the first experimental aircraft in the E-series. Initial prototypes, such as the E-2 and E-4, were intended to validate the delta wing concept and evaluate different intake configurations. These early aircraft featured nose intakes with adjustable shock cones, a critical component for managing airflow into the engine at supersonic speeds. Test pilots quickly confirmed that the delta wing offered excellent performance in the transonic and supersonic regimes, though low-speed handling remained a challenge. Flight testing revealed a number of issues that required engineering solutions. Landing speeds were significantly higher than on conventional swept-wing fighters, increasing the risk of overrun on shorter runways. Engineers addressed this by refining the wing's leading-edge design, adjusting the control surfaces, and improving the braking parachute system. Another concern was the relatively limited internal fuel capacity, which restricted range. While additional fuel tanks could be fitted externally, this would slightly reduce the aircraft's top performance. Nevertheless, the Soviet Air Force accepted these limitations in exchange for the speed and climb rate advantages the design provided. The Tumansky R-11 turbojet engine, introduced during the E-5 prototype stage, proved to be a key factor in the MiG-21's eventual success. It offered reliable thrust, good acceleration, and the ability to sustain supersonic flight without excessive maintenance demands. Engine testing emphasized rapid response to throttle changes, a necessity for interception missions. Simultaneously, weapons integration trials began, initially focusing on a single 30mm NR-30 cannon, and early models of the K-13 AA-2 Atoll infrared-guided missile, itself developed from a reverse-engineered AIM-9 Sidewinder captured during regional conflicts. High-speed trials were conducted to explore the aircraft's maximum performance envelope. Test flights achieved speeds exceeding Mach 2, confirming the MiG-21's status as one of the fastest interceptors of its generation. Climb tests demonstrated that it could reach operational altitudes of over 15,000 meters in just a few minutes, a vital capability for intercepting high-flying reconnaissance aircraft or bombers. These performance metrics impressed Soviet military leadership and validated the design's suitability for the point defense role. However, the testing phase was not without setbacks. Stability issues at certain angles of attack required modifications to the tail surfaces and adjustments to the control system. Pilots also reported that the Delta Wing's high-speed stability came at the cost of reduced maneuverability in close dogfights compared to earlier MiG models. This was noted for future tactical planning, as the aircraft's role would prioritize quick interception over prolonged turning engagements. By the late 1950s, the E-6 prototype, closely resembling the eventual production MiG-21F, had emerged as the definitive configuration. This version incorporated a cleaner fuselage shape, refined air intake design, improved canopy visibility, and updated avionics suited to missile-based air combat. State acceptance trials confirmed that the aircraft met the Soviet Air Force's requirements for speed, climb, intercept capability, and operational simplicity. With the testing program successfully completed, preparations began for mass production. The MiG-21 was poised to become the primary Soviet short-range interceptor of the 1960s, marking the start of an unprecedented production run that would see thousands built for both domestic use and export to Allied nations around the world. The MiG-21 entered operational service with the Soviet Air Force in 1959, initially in the MiG-21F configuration. Deployment began with interceptor regiments stationed in the western USSR, where the aircraft's high speed and climb rate could be used to counter potential incursions by NATO bombers and reconnaissance planes. The introduction process was rapid, reflecting both the simplicity of the design and the Soviet doctrine of quickly integrating new technology into frontline units. Pilots transitioning from earlier MiG-17 and MiG-19 fighters required additional training to adapt to the Delta Wing's unique handling, especially during takeoff and landing. But many reported that the aircraft's performance in the supersonic regime was a significant leap forward. Early operational roles focused on high-speed interception under the guidance of ground-controlled interception (GCI) networks. The MiG-21's limited onboard radar made it dependent on ground-based radar stations to vector it toward incoming targets. Once in visual range, the pilot could engage with infrared-guided K-13 missiles or the onboard NR-30 cannon. This reliance on GCI reflected the Soviet emphasis on centralized control of air defense, enabling the MiG-21 to function effectively despite its relatively basic avionics. The first large-scale training exercises revealed the aircraft's strengths and limitations. In interception drills, the MiG-21 could rapidly climb to engage high-altitude targets, a capability that impressed commanders concerned about supersonic bombers like the B-58 Hustler or the British Vulcan. However, endurance was short, typically less than an hour of flight time without external tanks, making efficient coordination with ground controllers essential. Its turning performance was adequate for short engagements, but prolonged dogfights drained fuel reserves quickly. Within the Soviet Air Force, the MiG-21 quickly replaced older subsonic interceptors in many units, and its production scale allowed for the rapid expansion of supersonic fighter coverage across the USSR's vast territory. The aircraft also began to appear in Soviet-aligned states under military aid agreements, with early deliveries to Warsaw Pact members such as Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. These export models were essentially identical to the Soviet versions, providing Allied air forces with a modern interceptor at a fraction of the cost of Western fighters. Pilot feedback during the first years of service was largely positive, particularly regarding the MiG-21's acceleration, climb rate, and simplicity of maintenance. Ground crews appreciated the accessibility of major systems, the ruggedness of the airframe, and the ability to operate from relatively short and unprepared runways. These features aligned perfectly with Soviet tactical doctrine, which envisioned the dispersal of aircraft to avoid destruction in a surprise attack and the ability to sustain operations from austere forward locations. By the early 1960s, the MiG-21 was a fully integrated component of the USSR's layered air defense network. In peacetime, it served as both a deterrent and a rapid reaction force, scrambling to intercept unidentified aircraft approaching Soviet airspace. In wartime planning, it was expected to blunt enemy bomber attacks in the opening stages of a conflict, buying time for longer-range missile systems and other fighters to engage. The stage was set for the MiG-21's first real combat trials, where its performance would be measured against Western aircraft in actual engagements rather than controlled exercises. The MiG-21's combat debut came in the early 1960s, and over the following 2 decades it saw extensive action in multiple regional conflicts, becoming one of the most widely used jet fighters in actual wartime conditions. Its first confirmed combat operations occurred during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, when Indian Air Force MiG-21FLs were deployed against Pakistani F-86 Sabres and F-104 starfighters. While initial engagements were limited, they demonstrated the aircraft's ability to hold its own against Western designs when flown with proper tactics and supported by capable ground control. The type's first sustained test came in the Middle East. Soviet-supplied MiG-21s entered service with Egypt and Syria in the mid-1960s and were quickly drawn into the 1967 Six-Day War. In this conflict, the MiG-21 faced advanced Israeli Mirage 3s and suffered heavy losses, largely due to preemptive Israeli strikes that destroyed many aircraft on the ground. In air-to-air combat, however, the MiG-21 showed it could match its adversaries in speed and climb, though limited radar range and missile performance were noted as shortcomings. The 1969-1970 War of Attrition and the 1973 Yom Kippur War provided further opportunities for evaluation. Egyptian and Syrian MiG-21s engaged Israeli F-4 Phantoms and Mirage 3s, scoring confirmed kills but also sustaining significant losses. In the Yom Kippur War, improved tactics, better pilot training, and coordinated use with surface-to-air missile systems increased the MiG-21's effectiveness, allowing Arab forces to achieve more balanced exchange ratios in certain phases of the fighting. Still, the aircraft's short range and reliance on ground-controlled interception limited its flexibility in prolonged engagements. In Southeast Asia, the MiG-21 earned a reputation as a formidable dogfighter during the Vietnam War. North Vietnamese pilots, flying versions such as the MiG-21PF and MF, employed hit-and-run tactics against U.S. F-4 Phantoms, F-105 Thunderchiefs, and later F-111s. Using their aircraft's high climb rate and acceleration, they would strike from advantageous positions, fire short-range missiles, and disengage before the enemy could respond effectively. The compact size of the MiG-21 made it difficult to detect visually, and when supported by ground radar, it could be vectored into positions that maximized its strengths. Although American pilots developed counter-tactics and benefited from better radar and missile technology over time, the MiG-21 remained a respected adversary throughout the conflict. In the Indian subcontinent, the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War saw MiG-21s achieve notable successes. Indian pilots used their aircraft for both air superiority and ground attack missions, downing several Pakistani F-104s and Sabres. The aircraft's performance in this conflict further enhanced its reputation, and India would go on to operate upgraded MiG-21 variants for decades afterward. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the MiG-21 had been in combat in Africa as well, flown by countries such as Angola, Ethiopia, and Libya in various regional wars. In these theaters, results varied depending on pilot skill, training, and logistical support, but the MiG-21 often proved more than adequate against older or equally matched opponents. Through these engagements, several trends became clear. The MiG-21 excelled in short, decisive encounters, especially when directed by a competent ground control network. Its limitations became more apparent in extended battles requiring long-range pursuit, complex radar interception, or multi-role flexibility. Still, its combat record across continents underscored the success of the Soviet design philosophy. An affordable, fast, and relatively simple fighter that could be built and fielded in large numbers, allowing Allied nations to project credible air power even against technologically advanced adversaries. Variance and technological evolution of the MiG-21 reflected both the Soviet Union's ongoing modernization efforts and the specific requirements of numerous export customers. From its initial production version, the MiG-21F, the aircraft underwent a continuous series of upgrades in avionics, weapon systems, engines, and structural refinements, resulting in more than 15 major variants over its production life. The early MiG-21F and F-13 models were lightweight day interceptors equipped with minimal radar capability and armed with a single NR-30 cannon and early-generation K-13 infrared missiles. These aircraft prioritized speed, climb rate, and simplicity, but their limited all-weather capability soon became a concern. To address this, the MiG-21PF was introduced with the RP-21 Sapphire radar, enabling interception in poor visibility and at night, though at the cost of removing the internal cannon in favor of missile-only armament, a decision later reversed due to combat feedback emphasizing the continued importance of guns in air combat. Trainer versions were also developed to facilitate the transition of pilots to the Delta Wing fighter's handling characteristics. The MiG-21U and MiG-21UM two-seat trainers featured a second cockpit with full flight controls, but retained much of the performance of the single-seat variants. These trainers were essential for both Soviet and foreign operators, allowing new pilots to gain experience in a controlled environment before flying combat missions. Reconnaissance and specialized ground attack variants emerged in some export markets, often through local modifications. For example, India developed the MiG-21 Bison upgrade program, incorporating modern radar, electronic countermeasures, helmet-mounted sights, and compatibility with beyond visual range missiles. This modernization extended the operational relevance of the aircraft well into the 21st century. Other nations adapted MiG-21s with indigenous avionics or weapon systems to suit their specific strategic needs, demonstrating the platform's adaptability. Licensed production expanded the aircraft's reach further. In Czechoslovakia, Aero Vodokody produced the MiG-21 F-13 under license, while India's Hindustan Aeronautics Limited manufactured the MiG-21 FL, M, and BIS models domestically. China developed its own derivative, the Chengdu J-7, which incorporated local modifications and was produced in large numbers for both domestic use and export. The J-7 lineage in turn spawned further developments in countries that purchased it, making the MiG-21's basic design one of the most reproduced jet fighter blueprints in history. The continual evolution of the MiG-21 reflected its ability to remain competitive across decades of rapid technological change. Although newer fighters offered superior avionics, sensors, and weapons, successive upgrades kept the MiG-21 relevant in both frontline and reserve roles, ensuring it would remain in service around the world long after its original designers had envisioned. This adaptability was a major factor in its longevity and in the establishment of its reputation as one of the most produced and widely operated supersonic fighters ever built. The global impact and legacy of the MiG-21 are unmatched among supersonic fighters, both in terms of sheer production numbers and its influence on air combat doctrine across multiple continents. With over 11,000 units built between the late 1950s and the mid-1980s, plus thousands more in Chinese J-7 derivatives, the MiG-21 became the most produced supersonic jet in history. Its widespread availability, low cost, and straightforward maintenance requirements allowed even developing nations to field capable jet fighter forces, altering the balance of regional air power in many parts of the world. Exported to more than 50 countries, the MiG-21 became a central component of Soviet foreign policy. Supplied to Warsaw Pact allies, Middle Eastern states, Asian partners, and African nations, it offered a rapid means of modernizing client air forces. In many cases, the aircraft became the first supersonic fighter operated by these nations, fundamentally changing their defensive and offensive capabilities. Its presence in multiple Cold War flashpoints ensured that it faced nearly every major Western fighter of its era, from the F-4 Phantom II and Mirage III to the F-15 and F-16 in later decades. The MiG-21's influence extended beyond military hardware into operational philosophy. Its design philosophy, prioritizing speed, climb rate, and simplicity, was studied by both Eastern and Western planners. For the Soviet Union and its allies, the aircraft fit seamlessly into ground-controlled interception networks, serving as the fast reaction element of integrated air defense systems. For opponents, facing the MiG-21 required adaptations in tactics, such as maintaining energy advantages, using longer-range weapons, and coordinating radar coverage to counter its high-speed hit-and-run engagements. Its longevity is one of its most remarkable features. While conceived in the 1950s for short-range interception against bombers, the MiG-21 evolved into a multi-role platform capable of air superiority, ground attack, and reconnaissance missions. Continuous upgrades by operators, ranging from new radar and missile systems to glass cockpits and electronic warfare suites, allowed it to remain in combat service into the 21st century. In some countries, like India, Vietnam, and Angola, upgraded MiG-21s still perform active duties decades after their introduction. Culturally and symbolically, the MiG-21 became an icon of the Cold War. For Soviet-aligned nations, it was a symbol of independence from Western military suppliers. For the West, it was a constant adversary encountered in conflicts from Vietnam to the Middle East. In air museums worldwide, restored MiG-21s serve as tangible reminders of the era when the aircraft's distinctive delta-wing silhouette was a common sight in skies from Europe to Africa and Asia. Doctrinally, the MiG-21 demonstrated the enduring value of producing a fighter in large quantities and equipping a wide network of allied states with a common, easy-to-maintain platform. This created interoperability within the Soviet sphere and ensured a level of standardization that made training, logistics, and tactics easier to share among allies. The legacy of the MiG-21 is therefore twofold. It was both a product of its time, optimized for Cold War air defense priorities, and a timeless example of a combat aircraft whose adaptability, affordability, and performance ensured relevance far beyond the expectations of its original designers. Its long service life and global footprint make it one of the most influential combat aircraft ever built, shaping air forces, air battles, and aviation history for over half a century. Beyond its widely known service record and export history, the MiG-21's career includes lesser-known chapters that highlight its adaptability and the range of roles it played outside its primary mission as a frontline fighter. These unseen uses often emerged from the specific needs of individual operators or from experimental programs conducted by both the Soviet Union and foreign air forces. One of the most notable non-standard applications was its use as an aerial research and test platform. The MiG-21's robust structure, high performance, and availability in large numbers made it an ideal candidate for testing new avionics, weapons, and aerodynamic modifications. In the Soviet Union, several airframes were fitted with experimental radar systems, navigation equipment, and missile guidance technologies that would later be incorporated into newer aircraft such as the MiG-23 and MiG-29. Some MiG-21s were even modified to test helmet-mounted sighting systems, an innovation that would significantly enhance short-range missile combat. Another lesser-known role was its adaptation for high-speed target drone duties. In some Eastern Bloc countries, older MiG-21s nearing the end of their service lives were converted into remotely piloted aircraft to simulate supersonic threats for air defense training. These drone-converted MiG-21s allowed surface-to-air missile crews and interceptor pilots to train against a realistic, fast-moving target, improving the readiness of air defense forces without risking manned aircraft in hazardous training scenarios. In combat support contexts, several nations employed the MiG-21 for reconnaissance and electronic warfare missions. Specialized pods carrying cameras, side-looking airborne radar, or electronic jamming equipment were fitted under the fuselage or wings, enabling the aircraft to gather intelligence or disrupt enemy communications. These adaptations often required minimal structural changes, highlighting the design's inherent flexibility. Some operators also experimented with the MiG-21 in ground attack configurations far beyond its original design intent. Equipped with unguided rockets, bombs, or even locally developed precision-guided munitions, these aircraft provided close air support and strike capabilities in conflicts where air superiority had already been achieved. In certain African and Asian wars, MiG-21s were used extensively in this role, delivering effective strikes against insurgent forces, fortified positions, and logistical hubs. There were also secretive projects aimed at enhancing the MiG-21's survivability and combat relevance late in its life. In the 1980s and 1990s, some operators initiated modernization programs in cooperation with Western aerospace companies, incorporating NATO-standard avionics, GPS navigation, and compatibility with Western air-to-air missiles. These hybrid configurations allowed older airframes to compete with more modern fighters in limited contexts, often at a fraction of the cost of acquiring new aircraft. The adaptability shown in these roles reinforced one of the MiG-21's most enduring qualities. It was more than just a point defense interceptor. Its simple yet capable design allowed it to be transformed into a tool for research, training, and a variety of combat and support missions. These lesser-known chapters not only extended the aircraft's service life but also cemented its status as one of the most versatile jet fighters in aviation history. In its final decades of active service, the MiG-21 transitioned from being a primary frontline fighter to fulfilling secondary roles, reserve duties, and specialized missions. Yet it continued to appear in combat well into the 21st century. By the late 1980s in the Soviet Union and many Warsaw Pact nations, the type had largely been replaced in top-tier air defense roles by more advanced fighters such as the MiG-23, MiG-29, and Su-27. However, the sheer number of airframes in service worldwide meant that retirement was a gradual process, often tied to the economic realities of its operators. In many developing nations, the MiG-21 remained the core of national air forces. Countries such as India, Vietnam, and several African states continued to rely on upgraded versions or locally modernized variants for both air defense and ground attack missions. Some of these aircraft received significant avionics overhauls, new weapon compatibility, and structural life extension programs, enabling them to meet contemporary operational requirements despite their vintage. The Indian Air Force's MiG-21 Bison program was among the most notable of these modernization efforts, allowing the aircraft to carry modern, beyond-visual range missiles and electronic countermeasures. Combat appearances during this period underscored the aircraft's enduring utility in certain contexts. MiG-21s were used in the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, the Balkan conflicts, and various African regional wars. In some cases, they were flown by experienced pilots able to exploit the aircraft's speed and climb rate to score victories against opponents flying technically superior aircraft. In others, they were used primarily in ground attack or patrol roles, providing valuable air presence in conflicts where air superiority was already contested or achieved. By the 2000s, attrition, rising maintenance costs, and limited spare parts led to a gradual drawdown of MiG-21 fleets. Some nations retired the aircraft entirely, replacing it with modern multi-role fighters, while others retained small numbers for training, aggressor simulations, or ceremonial roles. Certain air forces converted their remaining MiG-21s into supersonic target drones for missile system testing, ensuring the aircraft continued to contribute to defense readiness even after being withdrawn from combat service. The MiG-21's final operational years also saw it participating in joint exercises alongside modern fighters, providing valuable dissimilar air combat training. Its small radar cross-section, high acceleration, and simple systems made it a challenging opponent in visual range engagements, giving modern pilots experience against a type of adversary they might still encounter in limited regional conflicts. Even as frontline relevance diminished, the MiG-21's symbolic presence endured. In many countries, it became a national aviation icon, displayed at air bases, museums, and public spaces as a reminder of decades of service. For pilots and ground crews who operated it, the aircraft represented a critical era in their Air Force's history, a period when the Delta Wing silhouette was synonymous with national air defense. By the time the last operational squadrons prepared for retirement, the MiG-21 had already achieved a legacy few combat aircraft could match. More than 60 years in active use, countless engagements across continents, and a place in both Cold War history and modern air combat training. Its twilight service years confirm that while technology evolves rapidly, a well-designed, adaptable, and maintainable aircraft can remain relevant far beyond its original design life. The operational record of the MiG-21, when measured across its decades of service and multiple conflicts, is one of the most extensive in the history of jet aviation. It fought in more wars under more flags than almost any other aircraft of its era. Estimates suggest that the MiG-21 engaged in air-to-air combat in at least 30 distinct conflicts from the 1960s through the early 2000s, facing a wide variety of opponents ranging from subsonic fighters of the 1950s generation to advanced fourth-generation aircraft. In terms of combat statistics, the MiG-21's record is mixed, reflecting the vast differences in pilot skill, training quality, and supporting infrastructure among its operators. In the hands of well-trained pilots and integrated into effective air defense systems, it achieved impressive kill ratios, particularly in short-range, visual-range engagements. North Vietnamese MiG-21 pilots, for example, claimed over 200 aerial victories during the Vietnam War, often using surprise and superior climb performance to engage U.S. aircraft before disengaging rapidly. Indian MiG-21s in the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War scored several air-to-air kills, including against the faster and more heavily armed F-104 starfighter. However, the aircraft also suffered heavy losses in other theaters, especially when flown by undertrained crews or against technologically superior adversaries in environments with inadequate ground control support. In the Middle East conflicts of 1967 and 1973, Arab-operated MiG-21s managed to down Israeli aircraft, but also endured substantial attrition due to Israeli pilots' high level of training, better situational awareness, and advanced tactics. Similarly, during the Gulf War of 1991, Iraqi MiG-21s had little chance against coalition aircraft, equipped with superior radar, long-range missiles, and electronic warfare systems. Loss rates in some conflicts were more a reflection of the disparity in supporting systems and pilot proficiency than of the MiG-21's inherent capabilities. Where it was used as intended, as a high-speed interceptor guided by ground radar, it remained dangerous to adversaries well into the late Cold War. But when forced into extended dogfights with more agile or better armed opponents, its limited fuel endurance, basic avionics, and restricted missile capacity often became decisive disadvantages. On the ground attack side, the MiG-21 saw less success, primarily because its design prioritized interception over payload capacity or low-speed handling for precision strikes. Nevertheless, in many regional conflicts, it was pressed into service for bombing and strafing missions, sometimes with effective results against lightly defended targets. In such roles, losses to anti-aircraft fire could be high, given the lack of sophisticated defensive systems in early variants. Over its service life, the MiG-21 is estimated to have scored well over 1,000 confirmed air-to-air victories worldwide, though exact numbers remain debated due to differing standards of record-keeping and claims verification among its operators. This figure alone underscores its status as one of the most combat-proven fighters in history. Its longevity meant that pilots from multiple generations learned their craft in the MiG-21, and many nations' air combat doctrines were shaped in part by their experiences with the type. Statistically and historically, the MiG-21's operational record reflects both the strengths of Soviet design philosophy, fast, rugged, and simple to maintain, and the limitations of a platform built for a specific role that had to adapt to a rapidly changing aerial battlefield. Its successes and failures alike have provided valuable lessons in air combat, making its record an enduring part of both Cold War and post-Cold War military history. The legacy of the MiG-21 extends far beyond its immediate combat record, influencing both the design of later aircraft and the strategic thinking of air forces worldwide. For the Soviet Union, it validated the concept of producing a high-performance fighter in massive numbers, relying on speed, climb rate, and a small radar profile rather than on heavy electronics or long-range weaponry. This philosophy shaped subsequent designs such as the MiG-23 and even influenced certain aspects of the lightweight fighter movements in other countries, including the US F-16 program, which pursued a balance of agility, speed, and cost-effectiveness. For many nations, the MiG-21 became more than just a piece of military hardware. It was a symbol of sovereignty and technological progress. Countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East often showcased the fighter in national air shows and military parades, emphasizing their ability to field supersonic jets as a sign of modernity and self-reliance. In several cases, the acquisition of MiG-21s marked the first time these nations had access to such advanced aviation technology, setting a new benchmark for their air forces. Its global proliferation, serving in over 60 countries, also made it a key instrument of Soviet foreign policy. The aircraft was frequently provided on favorable terms to Allied states, strengthening political ties and ensuring a measure of dependence on Soviet technical support. In many Cold War proxy conflicts, the MiG-21 was the most advanced weapon system in the inventory of Soviet-aligned nations, and its presence often shaped the strategic calculations of opposing forces. Technologically, the MiG-21 left an enduring mark on fighter development. Its delta wing, although limiting in certain aspects, demonstrated the advantages of high-speed performance and climb in an interceptor role. Its relatively simple construction and ease of maintenance made it appealing to countries with limited industrial bases. Lessons learned from its operational use, particularly regarding the balance between speed, maneuverability, and avionics, were studied by designers worldwide. Even after more than 6 decades, upgraded variants of the MiG-21 remain in service in several air forces. Modernization programs have added advanced radar, precision-guided weapons, and improved cockpit systems, extending its relevance in an era dominated by 4th and 5th generation fighters. While these upgraded aircraft cannot compete with modern stealth designs, they retain utility in air policing, border patrol, and even limited combat roles in low-intensity conflicts. Culturally, the MiG-21 holds a place in aviation history as one of the most iconic fighters ever built. Its distinctive silhouette with the sharp nose intake and slender delta wings is instantly recognizable. Museums around the world display preserved examples, often alongside narratives of the conflicts in which they served. For pilots, the aircraft is remembered with a mix of respect and caution, respected for its performance and feared for its unforgiving handling at the limits. In the final assessment, the MiG-21's importance lies not only in its technical achievements but also in its unmatched global impact. It bridged the gap between first-generation jet fighters of the post-war era and the more complex multi-role aircraft of the later Cold War. Its story is one of adaptability, mass production, and strategic influence, and it remains a case study in how a single aircraft type can shape decades of aerial warfare and defense policy across multiple continents.